She's climbed the highest peak on every continent and served as the team captain of the first American women's Everest expedition. In 2008, Alison Levine made history as the first American to complete a 600-mile trek from West Antarctica to the South Pole. In 2010, she joined an elite group of fewer than 40 people who've completed the Adventure Grand Slam. That's some achievement. In order to do it, you must climb the 7 summits, the highest peak on each continent, and ski to both poles. These feats become all the more extraordinary when you find out that she's endured 3 heart surgeries and suffers from a blood vessel disease, which puts her at extreme risk for frostbite.
What do you have to say?
Luke, I am your father. At the South Pole. Very psyched to be here. Psyched to head for the summit. Never in a million years would I have thought I'd be laying on my back at 26,000 feet sucking O's. But I am. And you know what? Feels all right.
Feels all right. In addition to a successful career on Wall Street and in academia, Alison Levine is the founder of the Climb High Foundation. That's a nonprofit organization dedicated to improving the lives of jobless women in Africa by training them to be trekking guides and porters in their local mountains. Before the foundation, that was something that was quite taboo in many of these communities. She's also the author of the New York Times bestseller, On the Edge, The Art of High Impact Leadership. And she joins us now to talk about her journey, which is extraordinary. You know, when I was reading that, I'm like, mountaineer, adventure. It's like, I'm like looking at, like, there's 4 things I threw out there. One would be tough to do. You've done all 4. I want you to tell this story. We'll dive into everything else. But I saw you tell this story about being at, I think it was at a dinner party with this guy from J.P. Morgan. And I thought it was absolutely hysterical. And you have to relate it to our audience.
All right. So in 2002, I served as the team captain for the first American women's Mount Everest expedition, and our team came to within just a couple hundred feet of the summit, and we ended up having to turn around in a storm. And of course, you know, you got to always make smart decisions when you're on a big mountain like that, and if you push through a storm, you may not be able to get back down. And of course, the #1 goal of any expedition is to come back alive. So you make smart decisions. Sometimes that means turning your back from the summit just a few hundred feet away. So I was at a dinner party shortly after my return from the expedition, and the host of the dinner party was, introducing me to the other guests. And he looked at the person sitting across from me, and he was introducing me, and he said, "Hey, this is my friend Alison. Oh, she climbed Mount Everest." And then the guy sitting across the table from me said, "Oh, no way, all the way to the top?" So of course I had to respond, "Well, we had to turn around a couple hundred feet from the top in a storm." And he said, "Oh, so you didn't climb Mount Everest." And I thought, And I explained the whole situation. Look, we were on that mountain for 2 months. We gave it our best shot. We got this close to the summit. We just had bad luck with the weather. That's the way it goes. I gave him the whole lecture about getting to the top is optional, getting down is mandatory. And he said, "Yeah, but if you weren't at the very top, then you didn't climb it. It doesn't count." So I was like, "Okay, what do you do, tough guy?" And he explained that he worked for J.P. Morgan. So I said, "No way, you are the CEO of J.P. Morgan?" And he looked at me and shook his head, and he said, "No, I'm not the CEO. I work in fixed income trading." And I said, "Oh, well then, I guess you don't really work for J.P. Morgan then, do you? Because if you're not at the very top, then it doesn't count." He's like, "Oh, that's totally different." It's like, whatever. But you do get that on occasion, and it's hard to explain to people, that the summit is not the end-all, be-all, holy grail. It's just you got to look at it, these expeditions, as the opportunity to learn. Everyone's a good experience. You take what you learn on one mountain, you bring it with you to the next mountain, and that's really what's important.
But you did make it to the top.
I did make it to the top, but it
now you can go back and tell him, "I made it to the top."
Where's that guy?
"Are you the CEO?" And he's going to say no, and you're like,
well, one of us. So I actually went back to the mountain 8 years later in May of 2010 and did make it to the summit on my next expedition. But, I had 8 years of time in between the first and the second one, and I learned a tremendous amount, on all of my expeditions in between those 2 summits. And I really learned a lot more about my pain threshold, my risk tolerance. I I knew what it felt like to get the living snot kicked out of me high up on a summit ridge in a storm, and I really wasn't afraid of that the second time around.
And when you get to the top, I've heard you say, it's like, I mean, it's extraordinary. But I mean, is it kind of like awe-inspiring, or is it like, well, this is just one more step?
Well, it is pretty awesome to be up there, I will say. It is cool when you get up there and you realize that you are standing on top of the highest mountain in the world, but you have to keep it in perspective and realize that you're only up there for a few minutes. I mean, I was on the summit for 30 minutes. That was considered, a long time to be on the summit. And what I realized was that plenty of, better, stronger, more skilled, much more deserving climbers than Alison Levine, didn't make it to the top for whatever reason. Most climbers turn around because of the weather. And people that stand on top of Mount Everest for a few minutes are no better than the people who turn around just short because, like I said, it's not about standing on the top. It's about the lessons you learn along the way, and then what you're going to do with that information to be better going forward.
Here's the interesting thing. I think everybody in life has challenges or adversity. There are very few people that I put in your category who are like, let me go chase pain, challenges, adversity. So what's in your makeup that's different than the rest of us, do you think?
Well, when I think about pain and adversity, I think, everybody has their own idea of what that is. For me, I love these environments. I love being out in the mountains, or I love being on a North Pole or South Pole expedition. When I think about people sitting behind a desk every day, for me, that kind of seems painful. And I spent 3 years working on Wall Street, and although I didn't really love the job that much and didn't last very long there, I still appreciated the environment and everything I learned from it. So I think that to each person, pain and discomfort and challenge is represented by something different. And I mean, I look at people who are working and raising kids, and to me, I feel like they're doing the impossible, because raising kind, compassionate children who will contribute to their communities, the most important job in the world. I mean, I'm not doing that. I'm a dog. I have a black lab. That doesn't count. But I look at some challenges that other people have that I think are much more difficult than what I'm doing in these mountains or on these polar expeditions.
But you were telling me before we started taping that climbing the mountain in Africa meant so much more to you. Talk to me about that and how that created the charity that you're so involved in.
Well, obviously, when you do these big expeditions, you're putting a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into these trips, and all the training, and then finding a sponsor. I mean, a lot of people fund their own trips. For me, I had big financial sponsors. Ford sponsored my 2002 Everest expedition, and then you're on the mountain for a couple of months, and so much goes into all of this, and you can't be hell-bent on always making it to the top. I mean, sometimes you're going to have to turn away from a summit. So you can come back from these long expeditions and kind of go into a little bit of a funk and think, man, all that blood, sweat, and tears, what do I have to show for that? And I started to ask myself some tough questions after that 2002 expedition, and I thought, what kind of lasting impact is there from climbing a mountain? And I knew for me there was lasting impact because I was learning so much, but I thought, how does this impact anything else in the world besides me? And I really got my answer to that question when I went to the Ruwenzori Mountains in 2005, and these mountains border Uganda and the Democratic Republic of Congo, so kind of a sketchy area because of the war between those countries, the conflict that has been going on and off for decades. But what I discovered when I went to this region was that local women were not allowed in the mountains. It was culturally taboo. And because local women were not allowed in the mountains, they had no way to earn a sustainable living wage, because working in these mountains as a porter or a trekking guide was the only way that the locals could make money. And so women had no way to earn money. And they also were considered property of men. That's just the cultural norm in that area, that women are owned by men. They have no rights, no land rights or ownership rights. They can't own homes or anything like that. And they had little access to healthcare, education, and as a result, the average life expectancy was only 42. And so when I learned about all of this, I thought, this is kind of a messed up situation here, and I started asking people why women should be allowed in the mountains. And basically, the only reason I heard from people in the area was that, well, it's just always been that way. And I thought, well, that's kind of a crappy reason. So, so I ended up taking the first group of local women up into the mountains and trained them to work as porters and trekking guides. And they worked with our group while we were there, and learned to climb these mountains and ended up getting jobs, working as porters and trekking guides. They were earning the same wage that the local men were earning. And so I went back the following year and then 18 months after that, and I've now been back there a half dozen times to train more and more women. And for me, it answered my question of how can climbing a mountain have a positive impact?
We actually have a clip from some of the work that you're doing with Climb High Foundation. Let's take a look at that and then we'll chat some more.
It was a taboo for women to go up the mountains. Anything beyond the kitchen and that, it is not a domain.
In our history, in our culture, women are not supposed to come to the mountain.
Can you ask them if they have another way to earn money?
So they don't have enemy, they make money.
We want to hire all of them. Every woman who came here for a job today, we want to hire.
Okay.
Yay! Malabina, your first time! Yeah, my first time!
Having Malabina there really made me think about how cool of an experience the whole thing was. I mean, it was her first time to the summit, and it was very symbolic of the progress that women are making in general. That team of women showed an entire village that women can do anything that they want to do. They can do anything that men can do. They can break through traditional barriers that have been hard to cross in the past, and these ladies did it.
Talk to me what goes through your mind when you see that. First of all, the image of her, that smile, and then them hugging and laughing. That's just got to...
Yeah, I just want to be like, yeah, like, hell yeah, you know, when I see that. And I thought the courage and the bravery from these women to break away from their cultural norms and, you know, quiet all the naysayers and get up there and climb these mountains. I mean, they'd never been up at altitude before, and they strapped these heavy loads, you know, on their backs and on their heads, and they climbed the mountain, and they did it as well as the men did it. And for me, that just was such a huge gutsy move, and I thought what a great message to send to everyone in this village, not just the women and the young girls, but the men and everyone else. So I just feel a lot of pride when I look at them. I'm just so proud of the way they handled themselves in that situation.
And it illustrates this break from your early days Wall Street, because nobody on Wall Street would want a guy saying, especially some employer saying, we're hiring them all, every last one of them. I was watching that, I was dying laughing. But that was your point. Yeah. It's like every one of them.
If someone wants to do it, if somebody has the desire to learn and to work hard, let's take them. Let's take them with us and give them that opportunity.
What do you think the lasting imprint is in that community on these women in terms of self-esteem, just how you've changed the dynamic?
Well, it's interesting because being able to go back, you know, 6 months later and talk to them, and then 18 months after that, I got to talk to them and interview them and hear a lot about how their lives were changing. And the women said, you know, now the men in this area respect us a lot more because they realize that we are strong. And I think it really gave them a sense of pride and a sense of self-worth, and taught them that if there's something they want and they're willing to work for it, don't let anything get in their way.
Just as in a book, there are pages, but there are chapters. It can get much larger. Do you look at the landscape and say, you know, we're touching these women here, maybe perhaps this could be expanded to other areas?
Yes. So that is a great point. So this business model really works in any area where there is a significant trekking and climbing industry and where women are subordinate in social status. So there's a lot of areas where I think that this model could work, and so I would love to at some point expand these efforts.
One final question. You made it almost to the top, had to turn around and go back, but then eventually you do make it to the top. Do you learn more about yourself gazing up and saying, I've got to turn around, or do you learn more about yourself when you're up on the top?
Well, if I had to repeat one experience or the other, 2002 when we missed it by a few hundred feet, or 2010 when I made it, I would actually repeat the 2002 experience, and here's why. When you achieve something, especially if you achieve it easily, and I don't know who achieves the summit of Mount Everest easily, but when you achieve something, you tend to think, okay, you know, been there, done that, check that box. But when you fail at something, it causes you to really stop and think about the whole experience and replay it all in your mind and think about what went right, what went wrong, what you could have done differently, and you learn so much from failure. And I think in general, we're not a very failure-tolerant society, which is really too bad, because a lack of failure tolerance really stifles progress and innovation and prevents people from taking risks. You have to give yourself the freedom to fail. As long as you learn from it, you know, you come back better the next time around. Failure can be a pretty incredible learning experience.
Alison, thanks so much for coming in.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
At some point, I hope in your life, you'll take a risk. This hasn't